This show is brought to you by Horizon. We know what you think.
Here we go. All ones. All right.
Second
This is
popped
the
up.
All Ones channel. We're here with the legend Rusty Zimmerman, also credited as Russell Zimmerman in the books, who has written many games for many games that we love, like Warmachine, EarthDawn, Sprue, Satellite Rain, and my favorite, Shadowrun. You wouldn't introduce yourself to the audience?
How's it going, everybody? It feels a little silly to be called the legendary Rusty Zimmerman. But yeah, most of my writing credits are under Russell, so I sound less like a dog. But I feel like I only ever get called Russell if I'm in trouble for something. So please call me Rusty if you run into me online. Most of my social media stuff's under the name Rusty instead of Russell. But yeah, it's good to be here. Thanks for having me.
Oh, thank you for doing it. I'd like to see how did you get into writing for these, what I like to call nerd games? I mean, I'm a big nerd myself.
Well, I initially got started writing fan fiction, which grew out of playing Shadowrun online on the Shadowland BBS back in the late 90s into the early 2000s. I was on an online forum that was basically a play-by-post, and we were on there with Demon Seed Elite and Pistons, for instance, which are Shadowrunners in universe because those writers used those names while they were writing for Shadowrun. So we got run through some adventures by the people that wrote them, and that kind of pulled me hardcore into Shadowrun. But also because it was a play-by-post, I started to write little downtime pieces or backstory pieces for my characters, and occasionally I'd get a couple extra karma or whatever. And then it turned from that into just writing other fan fiction, and that fan fiction got me my first professional gigs. It was a piece called Blisters and Bayonets, which is a kind of trench warfare themed story set in the world of War
Oh man.
Machine and Hordes, the privateer press companies. So I had this ongoing piece of fiction that I was writing on their forums. And then one year at Gen Con, I ran into the lead writer and the magazine editor for the privateer press products. They were running demos, and they saw that I had my forum name on my Gen Con badge. And then it was one of the most surreal moments when they geeked out and told me how much they liked my stuff.
It's always
And I
great
was
when that
like,
happens.
what? Like, no, this is backwards, you know? And we got to talking after that, and they offered me a couple of gigs. So I wrote my first professional work that I wrote was for No Quarter Magazine, which was a magazine that Privateer Press did for War Machine and Hordes and Monster Apocalypse and all their stuff. So I wrote a couple articles for
About
them.
what year was this in?
Oh my God. I remember it was issue 16 of No Quarter Magazine. So canny viewers can maybe look that up. I want to say it was 12 or 13 years ago now.
Oh wow.
It's been a while. Every time I sit down and do the math for how long I've been doing this, I'm like, no, it can't be that long. But yeah, I want to say it's been about a dozen years now. So yeah, it was just an immediate bridge from fan fiction to canonical writing for a war game that I loved. And around the same time, there were a bunch of other guys in the Privateer Press community that were starting with this game called Spine Spur, and they reached out to me. So I was the lead fiction writer on Spine Spur, which is a supernatural horror afterlife type of game, super grim dark type of stuff. But it was pretty cool to get another professional gig all of a sudden. And then I was feeling my oats, so I reached out to Jason Hardy on some Shadowrun forums, and that's how I got started there. Just messaged Jason Hardy, and I said, hey, I've been a professional writer for a couple of months. I've got these other products under my belt, and if you guys are looking for writers, you could talk to Demon Seed Elite or Pistons. Those freelancers, I use their real names. I'm not going to here,
Oh
but
yeah.
and then I said, and by the way, you know, uh, you might remember me from, some posting here with short fiction. And he goes, yeah, aren't you the guy that won every short fiction contest here on Dump Shock? And that was where this was at, was the Dump Shock forum. And I was like, yeah, that was me. So he was like, yeah, we'll find you something, man. Like, we'll find you something.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah, so that's how it started. In each case, it was, just running into the right person at the right time, and having writing to show them, having some work done that they already kind of knew and recognized, was how I got all three of those first gigs. And then things kind of snowballed from there, because the geek industry is pretty small in the grand scheme of things. A lot of freelancers work for a lot of different companies. So if you've got a decent rep in the industry, that really helps. When you then reach out to a new company, you can say, hey, talk to so-and-so, we've worked together before. And
do you have any
that
advice for anybody who's trying to get into writing for some of these companies?
Number one is probably don't do it. It's you start to see how the sausage gets made, as it were, a whole lot more. And that can kind of sour you on RPG gaming a bit, being behind the scenes and seeing some of the errors that make it through, some of the advice that doesn't get followed, some of the ideas that do get picked up on, and then that you're like, God, this idea is dumb, but then it like turns into something, or whatever. So some of that,
I think that's
can
how we wound
sour
up
you.
with Dark Age BattleTech.
Yeah, that could be it. Who knows? But yeah, so sometimes it can kind of turn you on the hobby a little. But then, if you do decide to do it, make sure that you're not counting on this income. The going rate for somebody's initial work in this industry is about 3 cents a word.
Wow.
And I'm going to mention that because if somebody's offering you less, don't do it, right? Like, don't ever let somebody offer you just work for exposure. And that goes to any freelance artists out there, anybody else. Always get paid. If you're good at something, charge for it, right? And then number two, just be aware that even if you do get paid, this, it's 3 cents a word. That doesn't add up to a whole lot, right? But also, take a look at your contract, because a lot of contracts, as an industry standard, will say, we're going to pay you when the product gets published, or we're going to pay you within 90 days of the product getting published. And then look at the contract and see what it says, what counts as publication. If I'm just writing something that's going in an ebook, what's the date there for publication? And right, so pay attention to your contracts, and again, just mostly do this because you want to do it, but don't want to do it so bad that you get taken advantage of. Is that making sense? Like, it's a
Yes.
real narrow tightrope where
it's like doing business with a Ferengi. Always look at the fine print.
Yeah, well, it's just you've got to be in this job because you like it, but you can't like it so much that
you get it taken advantage of.
Right. So yeah, it's a very narrow line. And in my case, I'm lucky in that my wife is awesome in a lot of ways, but also she is the primary breadwinner for our house. She's a nurse and has been a nurse for about a dozen years. She was actually going to nursing school when I was first doing my freelance stuff. So during that transition period, and we don't need my writing to make ends meet. My writing turns into our fun money every month, basically.
Oh, nice.
Right. So there's that, right? Like that makes all the difference in my ability to do this job. There are people out there that somehow pay their bills with freelancing, but I think they just have a lot less bills than most people. And yeah, and maybe they're just lucky with who they work for and like timeliness of getting paid. and stuff like that. Because otherwise, it's just, even if you're working for a straight up company that does pay and that does pay on time with the contract, et cetera, it's just, there's so much about the publication timeline that's out of our control as
Mhm.
the writer. I wrote the Shadowrun novel Stirred about 3.5 years before it came out.
Oh, wow.
Like I turned it in, years before it got through the pipeline.
So yeah, it's you'd have to wait 3.5 years to get paid if it's for publication. Yeah, that's
Um, yeah, so and the contract for the novels are a little bit different, so there's some stuff in there, but it was still, for the final payment, I was waiting for publication, and it was just like what's going on, and it was just that there was other stuff to edit, other stuff to lay out. They had other novels, um, and yeah, and it was just, the vagaries of the industry make it a fickle beast.
Hmm.
So make sure you're doing it because you like it, and because that passion shows. If you're enjoying what you're writing, you write it easier, in my opinion, right? If you're excited to
Mhm.
tell a story as opposed to writing some homework, right? That's a whole
I
different
I think
vibe,
that goes for anything. And look at the guy who
right?
did the short film Astartes. He did that just for the love of what he wanted to do, and it came out
Yeah,
fantastic.
yeah.
Then you compare it to the old Space Marine movie. That was horrible.
Yeah, so yeah, you've got to like what you're doing, um, but then, like I said, take care of yourself, and don't be so excited to write something official for whatever game. And this is, I mean, I've written stuff for the 40K universe, I've written stuff for Warmachine, I've written stuff for EarthDawn, Mutants and Masterminds, excuse me, Shadowrun, World of Darkness,
Oh, I
whatever
hadn't realized you worked
game
for
world.
World of Darkness. I even
Yeah.
researched you a bit. That didn't pop up.
Did some fiction pieces for them. I mean, a couple fiction anthologies.
Oh, nice.
Um, so yeah, it's like, whatever game world you're in love with so much you want to tell stories there, just make sure you're still going to get paid, because it's not even just for you, right? If you work for free, they're going to expect the next person to work for free too,
Mm.
right? And that's part of why I've started to get paid more. After a good 6 or 8 years in the industry, you're kind of established, and
Mm.
I start to actually negotiate some. And partially that's because if we can drag that 3 cents a word average up, then that makes it
Oh
better
yeah.
for the next, generation of writers that wants to get into it. So yeah, you're making sure you're getting paid, and making sure that you're demanding some professionalism isn't just for you, it's for the industry. It's
Mm.
for everybody. So yeah, um, there
Oh,
we
yeah.
go. That's my advice there.
Oh yeah.
Just be careful, go into it eyes wide open, and have fun. If you're not having fun with it, stop and go do literally any other job where you will make more money. So
The next
there
one's
we
more
go.
of a Shadowrun specific, but you can go to any of the kind of goes for any of the games that you've worked with. Is Can you
Sure.
talk about some of your work that you have done and how it shaped the Shadowrun world itself?
Um, what's interesting to me is that I tend not to shape game worlds very much. I'm much more comfortable finding existing cracks in a setting and like wedging my stuff into those cracks
Mhm.
where there's room. And I think that comes from primarily thinking about RPGs as a player instead of a GM most of the time, like by default. The first stories I was writing were background stories for characters, right? And that's still kind of my mindset, is I tend to think real small. So it always kind of surprises me when people talk to me like I'm an authority on something.
Mhm.
Not just in that I know something, like sure, I know lots of things about the elves in the tier,
Mhm.
right? But when they talk to me like it's up to me about something happening, you know what I mean? Like there's a
Yeah.
difference there, and I'm like, hey, as long
There's a
as it
bit of a
makes
difference
sense, yeah,
between writing about a universe that already exists and creating it.
Yeah, and that includes, changing things in the universe. I tend to be very conservative when it comes to my writing. I tend to like the feel of a place to stay the same. The first Jimmy Kincaid novel doesn't have him fixing Puyallup and kicking out organized crime and civilizing everything and initiating a citywide universal basic income and right not like
Uh,
Puyallup is a shithole. Like it
uh,
stays bad.
I can hear the keyboards of a thousand Puyallupers writing right now about that comment.
yeah.
But
Um,
yeah, it's like fixing the Redmond Barrens. It's not going to happen anytime soon
yeah,
overnight.
or at least it shouldn't, in my opinion. So I try to write in a way that keeps the last game book workable, keeps the last world book more right than not. Probably the
Mhm,
best example is with the tier, where yes, there was a complete overhaul of the government of Tir Tangier.
mhm.
All of the old immortal elf princes are out, new princes are in. Um, but then I was like, this is still cool, right? Like the
Mhm.
setting of the tier is still cool. And the idea of these princes that are head and shoulders above everybody else is still cool. So like we want to keep that. But at the same time, I tried to tone it down enough that you could
I
actually Shadowrun there. Like the old tier book was real hard to actually use in a game because everything was so awesome that there wasn't a lot of room for Shadowrunners. So like with what I did there was I was like, listen, I want to tone it down so that you can actually play there,
Mhm.
but also I want to keep the vibe. So, to a lot of people, like it was these huge changes, but to me, it was just like I'm dialing it down from like a 12 to an 8 on a scale of 1 to 10. So, like, you can actually play there now. And P.S., here's some adventures to show that you can actually play there and to transition a campaign to there if that's what you want to do. And then, yeah, so
I actually
it's
appreciated
been,
that as somebody from Portland, Oregon. I
yeah,
really liked being able to get more access to my local area in the Shadowrun universe.
yeah. And it's fun to also try to put in a mixture of elven fantasyland tropes and like real life
Mhm.
Oregon. I was right before the show started. I mentioned that I finished my work on Shadowrun Anarchy while I was sitting in hospital waiting rooms with a laptop. My mother had a heart attack. I flew out to Oregon. I was sitting in Corvallis, which is the seat of power of the Information Secretariat
Mhm.
in Tir Tanger. Their secret police is where the hospital was. And there's a reason some stuff is super specific. If you go read some of the adventures in the Shadowrun Anarchy book, um, there's stuff in there that's particular types of berries that are in Oregon.
Mhm.
And actually, the name of a nurse in one of those adventures, I want to say it was like Moonbird. Like she was straight up. This is her legal name. My parents were hippies. Like that was the name on her badge at the hospital. So yeah, anytime you can pull some real world stuff in, that's fun to
Uh,
do.
and that's one of
So
the great things about Shadowrun. Being somebody who's from the Northwest, I was able to actually see a lot of these things that were actually in the game world and the real world.
yeah, and when you can do it, you do it. When you can't do it, of course, you go with existing canon, which is
Mhm.
an interesting hurdle that Shadowrun has because the game is, 30 plus years old. Uh,
Oh man,
it
you just
doesn't,
made me feel old.
right? But, for instance, if you're writing about one of the towns that now, one of the cities that now, Shadowrun makes up the Seattle Metroplex, it doesn't matter what Puyallup is really like in real life. It matters what it's like in Shadowrun for the last 30 years, right?
Mhm.
So you've got to strike that balance where if you can name drop something small and cool and add a level of detail that makes the world feel lived in, you do it. But you make sure you don't do it at the expense of existing canon because you don't want to, crap on somebody else's work.
And
You don't want
I
to suddenly
think one of
change the setting.
the
So
greatest things of the old FASA games is they progress the storyline through micro progression, not
yeah,
just huge jumps.
yeah, the living timeline or the real time advance is pretty key and pretty crucial. And it's also kind of fun. Like I feel old just like you do. But recently I've written some things just because my mind's on that tier story now. There's an NPC in the tier adventure in Shadowrun Anarchy that's now showing up in a lot of short fiction that I've recently submitted for some anthologies and stuff. That character is the child of my long-running player character from the Shadowland BBS that I mentioned
Oh,
back in the
wow.
day, the one that I ran through. Renraku Arcology shut down and Brain Scan, and some of the corporate betrayal. I think I don't remember. It's an adventure anthology. It's got about 4 adventures in it,
Mhm.
and one of them is a Pistons adventure that takes place in the tier. I ran my character, got run through that by Pistons. But that stuff coming out in Shadowrun was, early 2060s. And then I'm sitting down to write some other stuff, and I was like, man, my Shadowrunning single dad, L'Oreal was like 6. So let's do the math. Fuck it, man. She's in the Peace Force now, right? And like I bumped the, I was like, yeah, let's roll with this. So that was kind of fun. It lets you do some interesting stuff like that. When you sit down and realize how old you feel, you're like, but wait, my real life friends' kids are grown-ups now. That means my player character's kid can be a grown-up, and here's a new character. So there's definitely advantages and disadvantages to that living timeline. But for me, when it comes to shaping the world, I kind of try not to. I try to put fine kind of finishing details on stuff. Like I've tried to flesh out the conflict in Puyallup, but that's an existing conflict,
Yeah.
right? Like those guys existed already from old Seattle source books and stuff. So I try to take existing stuff and kind of hone it to a razor's edge or something like that instead of being the initial bladesmith, I guess, if that
So on this
analogy makes
topic,
sense.
how much of a free hand does uh, Catalyst give you? I couldn't remember their name for a second. Had a
Yeah,
brain fart.
depends. Like that's the dumb answer, but it's the honest one. Depends on what you're trying to change. Depends on what kind of follow-up you have planned for it when you try to pitch the idea. It depends on who else has tried to pitch a similar idea lately, and it depends on your ability to talk to like Jason Hardy
Mhm.
about it. Your ability to reach out to him and kind of sell him on something, depending on the size of the idea. A lot of what happens at Gen Con and Origins in the
Mhm.
industry, which your average geek has no idea about because industry professionals
Yeah.
like me, like we fucking fit in, right? But a lot of the people you see sitting down and having lunch or sitting down at a hotel lobby and whatever, uh, they're business meetings. Like I legitimately have filed Gen Con and Origins expenses as business expenses for the last 10 years because you go out there and you spend half of your time networking instead of playing,
Oh yeah.
and you're sitting down to pitch an idea to somebody, or you're sitting down to have a first face-to-face with somebody that you've been working with for 5 years and you guys have just never met in person, and you sit down to talk about the next big project or whatever. So a lot of the leeway that you get comes from your ability to just sell the idea, which is making it make sense in canon,
Mhm.
making it fit what's existing canon, and making sure that it adds something to the game and isn't just a bombshell for bombshell's sake, which is, to me, I think where we fail the most in
Mhm.
almost any RPG with a meta plot. Um, to me, the number one thing to look at is what can a GM do with this? How
Yeah.
easy are we making this for players? Are we just writing a story about awesome NPCs doing cool stuff? Or are we setting the table for players and GMs to sit down and have a feast?
That's something I
It's
never actually thought
really,
of. Is you want to
yeah,
give the players and the GMs enough unwritten room to be able to write their own with the story you're writing. I didn't think of
yeah,
that.
and that's something that it's really easy to mess up because you're excited about some new arc, right? Or
Mhm.
you're invested in some NPC and you think it would be great if they did this or whatever. But to me, it's like if we're gonna upset the status quo, if we're gonna change something enough that like that chapter from the last Seattle source book is out of date, right? If there's a
Mhm.
big enough change that that's not going to work anymore, we need to make sure that we're setting it up for something else. And sometimes you can do that by saying, hey, listen, Jason, I want to write this short story and my buddy wants to write an adventure for missions, right? And then suddenly you're hooking stuff together in a way that makes sense. And if my story mentions, yeah, and while Jimmy Kincaid and his friends hit this safe house, we mention that there's teams of Shadowrunners hitting these other safe houses simultaneously, right? And then suddenly you can tie stuff in a little bit better, and it feels more organic, and players are more included. um, One example of me trying to do that, which I guess is also me shaping the world to people that care about the ancients, was the first adventure that I wrote for Shadowrun, uh, which was called Ancient Pawns. It's part of the Elven Blood anthology, which is like $5 a drive through. It's like 7 adventures or something for like $5. It's really cheap. Check it out. That's the elf stuff I've been talking about. But the
Mhm.
first adventure of that was a change in the leadership of the Seattle chapter of the Ancients. But I made sure that it happened due to player characters. So it was, them getting hired to do stuff in an elven fancy challenge ritual where you show your leadership skills by guiding a team through doing stuff. So they got hired to represent Belial, this up and comer, who's also the child of a first edition existing character, because that
Mhm.
advancing timeline. But yeah, so it's player characters that did that. It's player characters that changed the Seattle Ancients. And I want players to be able to feel that every time they then read some of my fiction that's got, Belial and the Ancients in it. I feel like I would feel as a fan, like I would be psyched every time I saw that and thought, yeah, man, that was fucking me.
Yeah,
Right.
that's
Like,
it reminds me a lot
so
of the election
yeah,
campaign books.
yeah. And, just that's my thought is, anytime we're going to change something, make sure you're not changing it just for the sake of change. And B, make sure you're including players. In this case, the change was to keep the ancients feeling vital and young,
Mhm.
by giving them a young leader, but also giving them a leader that absolutely drinks the ancients' Kool-Aid. Like he believes in, he was raised in the gang in Seattle.
Mhm.
So he absolutely believes that they're a bunch of elven Robin Hoods and stuff. And that colors how the gang operates. Right. So, that there were reasons for it. But then also it was, because I just wanted to write some shit about the ancients because I'm an ancients fanboy. But then also there was that third aspect of I want players involved in this. So yeah, it's tricky stuff. You're trying to
Right.
shape the world, you're trying to sell it to your bosses, and then ultimately you and your bosses are trying to sell it to literally everyone else in the world that's gonna buy that book.
Yeah.
So yeah, it's again, it's kind of a tightrope. You gotta make sure your
Okay.
stuff works.
The next one is there anything that you've wanted to work on in the Shadowrun universe but have not had a chance to do so? Or is there anything you would have wrote differently?
There isn't particularly a lot that I've wanted to do that I haven't.
Mhm.
I actually I scratched a lot of itches early on. And I was joking with my friends that I got like achievement unlocked because like I wrote an adventure and I wrote about the ancients and I wrote about urban brawl and I wrote about adepts and I wrote about spies and
Mhm.
I wrote about the tier and like fuck it, man, I wrote about all my favorite stuff, right? So like I was definitely trying to do that initially because that
Definitely living
has
the dream.
always been my favorite stuff. Like State of the Art 2064, going back to third edition, was one of my favorite source books of all time.
Mhm.
And that's because it covered like all the shit that I love, right? Like it was adepts and related stuff.
Yeah.
So but yeah, so I was trying to definitely do that and write about I've always loved Urban Brawl. I've always loved the Ancients. I always loved the Tier. Always loved Adepts. Of course, my first solo project in Shadowrun was Way of the Adept,
Mhm.
which was an ebook that was my attempt at kind of fixing Adept prices in fourth edition and adjusting some stuff. And so like a lot of the stuff that was on my so-called bucket list, I've absolutely gotten to do. I'm at the stage now where I just want to do more of it. So
Mhm.
yeah, like I want to keep writing Kincaid stories. I want to kick off a new line of novels.
Mhm.
So it's not just Kincaid stuff all the time. I write a lot of Kincaid. Kincaid comes easily to me. But like, I can do more. There's more out there. Um, I yeah, so most of what I've wanted to do in Shadowrun, I've gotten the lead enough to do it. Jason's let me tug the leash enough.
Mhm.
I wrote the iconic characters for SR5, Sledge and Miss Myth and Gentry and that crew, which was another partial kind of bucket list thing in that I wrote a female dwarf, or sorry, a female troll.
Oh yeah.
Um, right? Like how
I think
rare
there
are
needs to be a
those?
lot more troll representation in Shadowrun.
Yeah, but she's a female troll that's the face of her group and
Oh
is good
wow.
at it, right? And like that's why her name is Myth,
Hmm.
because she's a fucking unicorn, man, right? Like that's rare as hell. So
She even has the
uh,
horns.
yeah, so I got to write some stuff like that that's kind of weird, but that also fits. Um, if there was anything that I would write differently, the biggest one that jumps out at me would be actually also that Ancient Pawns adventure, which
Mhm.
was like the second thing I've wrote for Shadowrun.
Yeah.
First thing I ever wrote was the intro fiction piece for Attitude,
Mhm.
and then I was working on Ancient Pawns and the Way of the Adept book at about the same time. But with Ancient Pawns, one of the mini adventures in there is a pair of pimps that are kidnapping uh, girls and then getting them drugged out. And the ancients send you to help because they snatched an elven girl. And they're like, no, that's enough of that. Fuck that. Shut these guys down. And it occurs to me that I could have been a little more careful with
Mhm.
that. Maybe put a content warning a little more clearly somewhere, because you never know who's going to be playing a game that is a
Oh yeah.
survivor of sexual assault or the like, or even just an abusive relationship they couldn't get out of, right? So I could have been a little more careful with that. Like
Mhm.
as it is, it's not awful, right? Like you're not walking in on anything graphic or whatever.
Yeah.
But I'm like, yeah, I should have written one more optional mini adventure and then had that one and put a warning on it, so it's up to the GM whether or not to include it, right? Like a small
Yeah.
thing like that, just a little change was all it would have taken for that to be a lot better.
Mhm.
um so it's mostly just it's small stuff like that. And partially I don't blame myself, because again, it was 10 years ago, and some of the gamer community's ideas on that stuff have progressed since then. So I wish I could go back and change it, but at the same time I'm not ashamed to have written it,
Mhm.
or we didn't get complaints or anything like
Yeah.
that. But it's a fairly small thing, but definitely keeping the hobby inclusive
Yeah.
and safe, and making people at a game feel safe and comfortable while they're
Mhm.
gaming is a priority, which is
Oh
a
yeah.
difficult thing to do in the world of Shadowrun, but you can absolutely do it if you try. So it
Oh
just
yeah.
takes that bit of effort. So yeah, I think the biggest one would be that. Um, the biggest mechanical one would be I wish I'd found a more graceful way to modify the prices of adept powers in that Way of the Adept ebook that I
Mhm.
did in fourth edition, because that got carried over into fifth edition as what adept ways do. And it was the same sort of, here's a list of powers, and then they get a discount. And I was like, God, this is awful. I fucking hate this. Because if you give a list of powers, the next source book that comes out with new adept powers needs to say by the way, add this to the list for warriors,
Mhm.
right? And like they need to be up on that. And that doesn't always happen because the next book to come out, the list powers, might have been written before I wrote this one, right? Because of how the pipeline works and publication schedules and stuff, because somebody else might have had another chapter they turned in late on that other book with adept stuff. It might not come out till a year after my thing,
Mhm.
right? And then you're out of sync and then stuff's getting missed. So I'm really happy that I got to write the adept chapter for Street Weird, which
Mhm.
came out a couple months ago for SR6, which is like well, I guess not quite the first SR6 stuff I wrote. I put stats for a muscle car and
Oh,
for
nice.
adversary, the mentor spirit adversary, in some Kincaid short fiction. But my first really rolling up my sleeves, writing mechanical stuff for SR6 was me going, adepts, give me adepts. I'm gonna do the adepts, and just like taking them and writing that and writing the rules for ways. So I was actually really nice to be able to kind of fix that, from my
Mhm.
early stuff in SR4 to now writing it for SR6, and writing what I think is a lot more graceful and elegant way to handle those rules. So
Mhm.
that was kind of nice, being able to kind of undo a mistake.
Okay, my next one is given that this is Pride Month when we recorded this, is how have you represented the LGBTQ community within the Shadowrun and other universes that you have written for?
Yeah, it's easy to do in the world of darkness,
Mhm.
right? Like it's expected in your average vampire game that a lot of the vampires are going to be queer as hell, right? Like that's thanks to just Vampire Lestat and all the Anne Rice
Oh yeah.
stuff, and all. So the world of darkness stuff that I wrote is a very easily enamored Toreador knight that is very clearly bisexual.
Mhm.
So I'm like 100% of my World of Darkness stuff. And now that I think about it, features queer protagonists. The other story
Oh,
I
nice.
wrote is a trio of traveling anarchs,
Mhm.
two guys and a gal, and they're a poly uh, triad.
Mhm.
So I'm like, wow, it just occurred to me that literally all my World of Darkness stuff has been queer. Cool. Oh, well,
It's
no,
kind of
that
funny
makes
when
sense.
you don't think
I
of it
can
until you're
now.
asked.
Yeah, I'm like, no, that fits though. Um, in Shadowrun, uh, Jimmy Kincaid's probably my most well-known character,
Mhm.
and his best friends are a pair of bounty hunters, Skip and Trace,
Yeah.
which is also kind of a bounty hunter joke. But and those two are lesbians. They're engaged now, by the way,
Oh.
not just girlfriends. But so his, some of his chief supporting characters that then play a larger role in some future
Mhm.
stuff. And they're really big fan favorites, which I adore. I've actually gotten more fan art for Skip and Trace than I have for Jimmy, and maybe it's just because Jimmy's kind of a straightforward looking guy, right? Um, but yeah, a lot of the fans have reached out to me about Skip and Trace, so
Mhm.
that was pretty cool, and I've tried to give them a little more screen time. I've also got a couple other supporting characters that haven't really gotten their own novels yet or whatever that are openly bi or gay.
Mhm.
The highest profile of those kind of uh, was weird phrasing because he's the shortest because he's a dwarf, but Hardpoint, the dwarven rigger
Mhm.
from SR5, is gay,
Oh.
and that came out in a recent novel in Stirred, my second big Kincaid novel. He's having a conversation with the party orc who has a pretty low charisma and gets angry easily. And he's like, I quit my corporate job because they wanted me to marry some orc girl. And he was like, oh, you're too good to marry an orc. And he's like, no, I didn't want to marry a girl. And then Sledge is like, oh. And then like the very next moment, the other dude on the team comes out of the safe house shower and Sledge is like, put some clothes on. And like Sledge starts freaking out about it and Hardpoint's just like rolling his eyes.
Oh.
Uh, but yeah, so I had a little bit of fun there with this, rough around the edges, macho street guy, orc, street samurai.
Yeah.
But yeah, so Hardpoint is gay, Skip and Trace are lesbians. And I've got a couple other characters floating around that I think if you pay attention to their inner thoughts,
Mhm.
and their monologues and stuff, you'll notice that they're not always 100% straight.
Yeah.
So some of them aren't quite as open and obvious as I was able to make it with Hardpoint and Skip Trace.
Yeah, that actually
But
makes me want to. I have to reread some books and see if I can spot some of that.
yeah, and it's just been a little something extra to add and to represent a little bit.
Mhm.
I like to think that by 2080, um, it won't be as big a deal,
Yeah,
and
let's
that's
hope
that's
so.
yeah. So yeah, I've been trying to work that in, and it's nice to not have to write much homophobia,
Mhm.
because again, it's the 2070s, it's 2080,
Yeah.
whatever. So there's a tendency in a lot of modern and a lot of historical LGBTQ fiction for it to be kind of torture porn, right? Just
Mhm.
heartbreaking stuff, because everybody wants to write about the struggles that people face.
Yeah.
But like, if the only stories out there are about people getting gay bashed or whatever,
Mhm.
it's just like shit. Like, sometimes I want to just read a fucking happy story,
Yeah.
right? Like, it's almost like the typecasting in Hollywood sometimes, where like, oh, the black protagonist has been to prison,
Oh
or
yeah.
or whatever, right? You've got this sort of just cycle of misery that certain characters are expected to be a part of, and representing that is important, right? Showing how awful homophobia is and stuff like
Mhm.
that. Then, but like, also, like, sometimes you just want to read a fucking happy story,
Yeah.
right? So yeah, I've been, trying not to lean on that too much and not make like a huge deal about the
Yeah.
sexuality of characters. There's a very rare person that's a little off put by it. But for the most part, yeah, like I try to just make it a thing. Like, it's just,
I think you
yeah,
have a very good point. Is you should show the good side as well as the struggle.
yeah.
It's,
And it's, for anybody else that wants to write about LGBTQ characters, the biggest piece of advice I can give, and this is coming from me, a bisexual man who has talked to an awful lot of other LGBT and Q, right? Is just don't make it the defining characteristic of a character. Like, don't make them the trans one,
yeah.
right? Like, it's just a part of who they are. Again, it's the same thing with these guys. It's not, hard point when you buy that pack of like 6 Shadowrun minis, the Prime Runners miniature pack. It doesn't say gay dwarf rigger, right? Like, it's just dwarf rigger, and he's not wearing pink all the time in the artwork, the cover art
Yeah.
that he's on, and he's not effeminate. He's a big burly dude with a big old dwarven beard, and so it's like, don't lean on the stereotypes. Don't make it their thing.
Mhm.
Just make it a part of them. Don't dwell on it any more than you dwell on another character's romantic interest or
Yeah.
ex or what have you. So yeah, some of it is sometimes hard to spot because of that, I think.
Mhm.
I've had people reach out to me and go, hey, wait, is this character? And then I go, yeah. And like, but like, you don't necessarily have to come out and say it, right? So
Yeah.
you don't have to make, and I don't mean this in a coy Disney way. Like, Disney's talking about how, oh, it's going to be the first openly gay Disney character on screen.
Yeah.
And I think they've done it like 6 fucking times, because it's kind of never an openly gay character, right?
Mhm.
Um, or after the fact, right? They'll pull a Dumbledore, right? And go, oh yeah, no, so and so was totally gay.
Yeah.
But so don't minimize it in a way that makes it, invisible, but
Yeah.
don't maximize it in a way that makes it the only thing you're writing about.
You got to have
So
good balance.
yeah, like, to me, it's just like you would any other character and their romantic stuff. We're writing pulp adventure fiction for a cyberpunk dystopia.
Mhm.
We're not writing romance novels. So just, you know find that balance and knock it out of the ballpark.
Okay. The next one is what is the difference between your writing processes of writing a novel versus a source book?
The biggest one is when I'm writing, mechanical stuff for a source book. You've got to stop and go back over the mechanical stuff a little bit more. I absolutely hate editing my fiction. When I'm writing a novel, a novella, an anthology piece, whatever, I tend to use what I call the Oreo method, where I eat a bunch of Oreos for a fucking sugar high, because I tend to lock myself away in my office, and maybe I'll miss lunch. But I'm like, oh, but I ate a whole row of Oreos, so I'm
Mhm.
fine. I'm not at a caloric deficit here, right?
I thought it was going to
Um,
be an analogy about layers.
yeah, yeah. Nope, it is not. It is literally Oreo cookies. And if I'm never sure about a paragraph, I stop and I reread that paragraph in the time it takes me to eat an Oreo cookie.
Hmm.
And if I don't see something that I have to change in that time, then I must not need to change it real bad.
Mhm.
So that's it. It's kind of a breakneck pace of not letting the stereotypical, writer's crippling self-doubt get hold. Just like, no, just type faster than it can keep up, right? Outrun your imposter syndrome because you're high on sugar from Oreos, right? Like, just don't give it a chance and you'll be fine. So when I'm writing fiction, I tend to just plow through it real fast,
Mhm.
and I don't let myself stop and agonize real often. But when you're writing mechanical stuff, that shit's important. Like, that
Mhm.
shit is gonna affect whether some player characters live or die someday, right?
Mhm.
Like, that's gonna, affect a lot in a lot of campaigns. So when I was working on Street Weird, which was my most recent mechanical thing,
Mhm.
with those adapt powers, I had an EarthDawn book out, because I put in a couple new adapt powers that are actually EarthDawn adapt powers.
Oh,
Look for
I
those.
love tying Earthdawn and Shadowrun
Yep.
together. Is I think it's
Yeah.
something that's been lost since FASA fell apart.
Yeah. So, but I had some EarthDawn stuff open, but then I had the first ever adapt stuff, like going way back, and I had third edition stuff. I had fourth edition stuff. I had in my notes while I was working on it. I actually had more word count of notes than I did of the stuff I was writing
Hmm.
at the time. Let me see if I can actually find my notes here, because I was going through and like every adapt power that I wanted, I went through and I found every earlier instance of that power,
Mhm.
so that I had all the page numbers. Here we go. I've got uh, animal empathy, street magic 175, street grimoire 169, state of the art 64, page 64. Like every power that I wanted to include, I opened up all my fucking PDFs and I went through and I found every prior instance of it.
Mhm.
Um, and then when it came time to write that power, I opened up every single time it had been written, and I looked at how the mechanics were different from SR3 to SR4,
Mhm.
and then they changed it like this. Then SR4 to SR5, we changed it like this. But now that things are different in SR6, how do I need to change it to keep the feel of
Yeah.
that power? Right. So yeah, that's where the historian in me comes out. I didn't actually go to school for writing. I was a history
Huh.
major, including grad school, including being a history professor. I went hard on history. I was an
Yeah.
English minor. Rolled some Brit Lit. Don't get me wrong, but I didn't take a single college class on creative writing. Um,
Wow.
so yeah, when I'm when I'm writing this stuff, the mechanics, it's absolutely the historian in me
Mhm.
that is doing the research and compiling the notes, so that when I change something, I know that I'm changing it on purpose. My notes for cosmetic control say facial sculpt, melanin control, keratin control, master of 1,000 faces, street magic 177, 178, street grimoire 171, 172, soda 64, page 66, 67. I actually wrote a new power that's all those old powers smushed together in one, because I hated that you needed 4 different adept powers to change the color of your hair, eyes, nails, and skin tone,
Yeah,
right? Like
and
I
a mage
hated
can do
that.
it with one change physical appearance.
A mage can do it to themselves and their team and all their clothes
Yeah,
with
with one
one
power.
spell, right?
Yeah.
With one 5 karma spell. So part of my thing was I wanted to stick with the SR6 theme of streamlining stuff.
Mhm.
Plus, these powers bugged me back in SR4 and stuff. The fact that they were split up in SR4 and 5, I was like, God, I hate this. I hate this so much. Because here's the other thing, like, it doesn't even change your aura, right?
Yeah.
Like, it doesn't hide cyberware. It doesn't like there's so many ways you're still gonna get spotted and recognized and tracked, and also it does nothing to help the rest of your team.
Yeah.
So like these powers aren't super game breaky powers, right? In your standard infiltrate the facility,
Mhm.
the adept doing all this shit doesn't really matter compared to the mage just going ding and
Yeah,
everybody's
done.
fine. So so yeah, I when I made that change, it was a very conscious change, and I still did my homework, I still did my research, and that stuff just takes a lot. So so yeah, I had really extensive notes for Street Weird that like I said, at the time that I was writing just the mechanical parts, my notes document here, what do we got? Yeah, my notes document is 7,500 words
Oh wow.
of just the notes and the mechanics. That's not the fluff of the chapter.
Yeah.
It's yeah. So it just it's a whole different process. You're writing formulas instead of sentences,
Mhm.
right? And you've got to have a different mindset um, with the fiction writing, especially because I'm often writing a first person narrative where Jimmy Kincaid says, you know, yeah, so me and Pink walked down the street. Like, it doesn't matter that that's grammatically inaccurate because it's Jimmy Kincaid saying that,
Mhm.
right? It's supposed to be Pinkerton and I, right? But
Yeah.
like he says it a different way in the is the format of the stories.
Format
So
of language, not proper English.
yeah, so that I don't care about when I'm writing the fiction. I just plow through. I make sure it feels right. I keep telling the story,
Mhm.
But when you're writing the rules, like, you got to be careful. You've got so many mechanical bits to keep track of, and that's true of any RPG. That's the best example I have. It's the most recent example, but yeah, like, you've just got to be a lot slower and a lot more careful. And looping back around to writing in the game industry, uh, it's the same 3 cents a word,
Mhm.
which is part of the problem, because a lot more work goes into writing a paragraph that's a new adept power,
Mhm.
right? Those words are harder words, but they're worth the same 3 cents
Yeah.
as everything else you write, right? Like, so it's an interesting quirk to the industry, is that some words are harder than other. Not all words are equal in how long they take you to write, or at least how long they should. So yeah, that's definitely an issue there. That's a big difference between writing fiction and writing mechanical stuff.
Mhm. So, what has been the your favorite thing that you have written? It doesn't have to be Shadowrun,
Yikes.
but
um Yikes, that's a big one.
you can always hit pass if you need to.
Like, that's what we're like, I would have trouble answering that with like one for each property I've worked on, right? That's like somebody just saying, like,
Well,
what's
let's
your
focus on
favorite,
Shadowrun,
like,
as that's
what's your
what brought you here
favorite
for.
song, right?
Yeah.
Like, it's that same sort of like, oh shit. um I feel like the most transformative one for my career was Neat, that
Mhm.
first Kincaid novella. That was some early stuff that was pretty key in relaunching the fiction line for Shadowrun. It was the first standalone big piece of Shadowrun fiction in a long time. for several years we were writing what was called enhanced fiction, where you added some rules to the back, and technically you weren't writing fiction, you were writing a mechanical source book with
Mhm.
a long intro fic, right? And some of those are great, don't get me wrong, but it's not quite the same as writing a fucking novel, right?
Yeah.
So so yeah, it was the first just straight up fiction piece in a while. And I'm just really grateful to the community for how they liked it.
Mhm.
The reviews for it, like on Amazon and stuff, are excellent, and that's fantastic. Every time, uh, you know, Amazon suggests my stuff to me a lot, like a lot, because they're harvesting my cookies from all these other pages and stuff. So they're like, "Hey, this guy likes Shadowrun," so they try to sell me my own books pretty often. And I'm not gonna lie, I click on them about half the time
Mhm.
because I'm just like, "Oh, I wonder if there's any new
Oh,
comments,
yeah.
right? Any new reviews down there?" And it just neat really blew up in a really good way that a lot of fans enjoyed. People really liked the character of Jimmy Kincaid, and kind of glommed onto him and Ariana and Skip and Trace
Mhm.
and that whole kind of crew. People really dug those guys, um, and it let me transition a lot more to being a fiction guy elsewhere in the industry.
Mhm.
Having that novella with a like a 4.8 star average on Amazon and that sort of thing, having that to send to new potential employers,
Mhm.
or because the geek community is small, potential employers having read that and enjoyed it, right?
Mhm.
But like having that in your pocket makes a big difference in the jobs that you get and the jobs you ask for. So I guess I'm going to go with neat because it was kind of the big uh, pivot point, I guess,
Mhm.
for lack of a better term, to I mostly write fiction now, and that includes novels. That includes novels outside of Shadowrun. That includes anthology entries. That includes all kinds of stuff. So yeah, I think I'll give the hat tip to neat.
Okay. So if you could be any meta type or archetype in Shadowrun, what would you be?
What would I want to be, or what would I accurately be? Because those are two
That's up to
different
you.
questions.
Whichever way you want to answer
Um,
that.
I would, of course, quite like to be an elf,
Mhm.
partially because the historian in me is curious about the longevity, um, right? Like that's alluring, no matter who you are, whether we should or not. Everybody wishes they could live a couple hundred years,
I think
right?
elves should have more beards.
It's true, right? Like they can. There's no rule that says they
Yeah.
can't. There's elves out there with some beards. But yeah, like I think it'd be dope to be an elf, um, just because, like I said, as a historian, I think it would be fascinating to live for a couple hundred years
Mhm.
and then go get a job as a fucking history professor again, right? And be like, listen, this was
After
the
you live the history, go
yeah,
teach it.
like this was the Trump presidency, right? Or whatever, right? You get to actually talk about shit,
Yeah.
that you were there for. So that would be interesting. Plus, you get to be skinny and good looking and stuff. That's
Yeah,
always nice
that's always a
as a
plus.
as a fantasy to a lot of us.
Oh yeah, I gotta.
Yeah. So I feel like realistically, I'd be a dwarf, and that'd be a close second because they also live a little longer.
Mhm.
So I'm not very short, but if you're picking a meta type that's not human, because picking human's boring.
Yeah.
Um, I think I'd more accurately be a dwarf, which still has some overlap in the Venn diagram with elf, right? You're long lived, you're still pretty okay in the tier.
Mhm.
You're not a straight up second class citizen the way
Yeah.
other metas are and all that. As to archetype, that's a tougher one because I famously adore Jack of all trades
Mhm.
in a lot of RPGs.
And that's one thing about Shadowrun is you can do that.
Right, and it might not, or rather you won't be as good at things as someone else
Mhm.
that hyper specializes, but like I would want to be a mystic adept. I'd give up a point of magic very efficiently and carefully, for a data jack and some other headwear,
Mhm.
maybe one level of muscle toner. See if I can sneak that in there, something like that. But yeah, very carefully give up a point of magic for BioWare and headwear. Spend some adept powers on being a decker,
Mhm.
and then have the magic also. So there you go. That's your
Yeah.
your meat, your magic, and your matrix, all in one character. That's pretty doable. Like you can be second best in a party at everything that way. So I feel like I would try that. So let's go with a dwarven. Uh, yeah, let's go there.
Okay.
Well, and I guess I'd have to put a couple points in perform, but not very many
There you
yet. I've only only been playing for about a year, so let's call it a 1 in guitar. So yeah, we'll toss that in there.
So my next question, I got a few more. I got three more of my questions, and I'll go
Yeah,
to some fan submission questions. Is
absolutely.
what brought you to writing about the cyberpunk genre in general?
Um, the novel Hardwired
Mhm.
um, was
That's part of the
some
Neuromancer
of
series, isn't it?
not quite. No, it's so I think it is. It's I just forgot his name. Walter John Williams.
Mhm.
Hardwired is a story about a Panzer jock, basically a rigger slash
Mhm.
smuggler, and a street samurai. The street samurai is the gal of the group, which was something that I glommed onto early. Like, wait, the in-person ass kicker is the girl, said 11-year-old Rusty, who should not have been reading this at 11. Like that's the other thing with me is I read ElfQuest, Thieves World, and Hardwired
Mhm.
when I was very young, and those three things I think all stand out in my writing. But also, I probably should not have been reading that shit at 10 and 11 years old. All three have some really mature stuff
Yeah,
going on in them.
yeah.
But
Well, they
Hardwired,
influence you for the better, it seems.
well, here's hoping, yeah. But yeah, Hardwired was a very formative book to me. It was my first cyberpunk.
Mhm.
I had Hardwired before I had, uh, any Gibson stuff, anything else. So I always adored cyberpunk as a genre, and then I got into Shadowrun just a few years later. Um, I bought it the Christmas that it came out. It was late
Oh wow.
1989. I picked it up with my Christmas money from 1989. So it was, you know, week one of 1990 when I had that core book. So I just never, I never wasn't a cyberpunk fan,
Mhm.
right? As long as I've been a fan of things, cyberpunk has been up there,
Mhm.
um, and Shadowrun in particular. So what latched me on to Shadowrun harder was actually that time I spent on the Shadowrun BBS. I mean, it's where I met my wife,
Oh
right?
wow.
Like so, it was those years post high school and being an undergrad and stuff. It was that age bracket where I was messing around on Shadowland, and like I said, there's a straight line from that fan fiction to writing professionally. And when you write professionally, you tend to want to write for the games you like. So, it didn't take a whole lot for me to fall right into this. And because I had to look it up to remember Walter John Williams' name,
Mhm.
now I'm seeing that there's a 30th anniversary edition
Oh
of
wow.
Hardwired that I might need to pick up. I currently have a hard copy of it signed by Walter John Williams,
Oh
so I'm
wow.
certainly not going to get rid of it. But I'm like, if there's cool shit in this 30th anniversary,
Yeah,
maybe
I
I'll
might
have
have
to
to.
pick this up.
I might have to look it up
Um,
myself. I haven't
but yeah,
actually read it.
Hardwired was absolutely formative, and as a secondary thing that ties it into the geekery, there was a Cyberpunk 2020 source book for Hardwired,
Mhm.
like a fully licensed standalone
Huh.
setting book set in Hardwired with some small rules changes and tweaks. That A is an excellent source book, but B, that very early created bridges for me in my tiny forming brain, where it seemed perfectly normal for me for novels and RPGs to go together.
Mhm.
Some of the first fantasy novels I read were Gord the Rogue in Greyhawk,
Oh,
and they
okay.
had stats for Gord in the back of them. And like these are fucking old school. These are some of the first
Mhm.
D&D novels ever, right? But they actually had some stats for D&D for Gord the Rogue, right? And then
Yeah.
of course moving into the 90s, you've got all these novels for Shadowrun and BattleTech and of course Star Wars and Star Trek and all these other things,
Mhm.
and then you've got an RPG for Star Wars, right? And so to me, this cross pollination between the fiction and the game
Yeah.
has just always been there. Like it's just so central to my mindset as a geek. I've never thought of any of these products as separate from each other, if that makes sense. I've
Oh,
never
yeah.
thought of an RPG that isn't great for writing stories in, because if it's not, like, what the fuck is wrong with your RPG setting?
Yeah.
Like, what are you supposed to do there if you can't tell cool stories there?
I
What are players supposed to do, right? Like, you're basically telling a cooperative story in an RPG.
yeah.
So yeah,
I kind
there's
of feel
never
a lot of writers like yourself. I'm not sure if this is true or not, but you guys take a lot of inspiration from your RPG sessions because I've read some books. I'm like,
I
that's probably in a session.
I don't do enough, honestly. Like I've never played Kincaid, for instance.
Oh, really?
A lot of people assume that he's like a long running character of mine, and I completely just made him up for neat.
Huh.
Um, I do have rough stats for him, like in my head,
Mhm.
because I try to keep the rules of the game world in place when I'm writing,
Mhm.
right? So once I establish that Jimmy's got a low magic, he's not going to be fireballing a skyscraper to the ground, right? Like I keep him within those constraints. Um, but yeah, like he's not an existing character of mine or
Mhm.
anything like that. I did basically play Gentry once, but that was after all that stuff came out.
Mhm.
It was at a Shadowrun missions game at Gen Con, when the year that this was all new. So I ran Gentry's stats that I wrote from the beginner box. I played Gentry in
Mhm.
a missions game. So
Huh.
like that's kind of the closest there. But again, like I made him up for the product.
Yeah.
Like he wasn't an existing character of mine or anything like that. Um, yeah, like I don't take a of direct inspiration
Yeah.
that way.
Huh.
I do have a character in the EarthDawn novels that I'm writing that's certainly influenced by a character that I'm running in a
Mhm.
long-running
And actually,
EarthDawn
I'd like to talk
podcast.
to you a lot more about EarthDawn and you want
Yeah,
to start
I
expanding
know
on that. That's been on my
that's on the list. If you check out the Legends of Earthdawn podcast,
mhm.
you'll recognize a lot of familiar Shadowrun faces from the podcast community as well as freelance writers. It's run by Mr. Johnson from the Arcology podcast,
And could you send a link that I
for
could put in the
instance.
description for this?
Sure. Um, but that podcast also has the uh, the line developer of EarthDawn in it with us.
Hmm.
So Josh is playing in that game with us. So we've been playing it for fucking years now. I'm not gonna say, like, I want to say it's been about 5 years,
Oh,
but
wow.
it's been a while. But there's lots of episodes up. Check it out. It's fun. But uh, my character in that is a very serious windling, and I just kind of adored the idea of a very serious windling.
Mhm.
So the novels I'm working on have a very serious windling, but he's not even the same primary discipline and stuff like that. So like that's probably the closest I've come, and even that character changed a bunch going into it. So um, yeah, like I guess it's just something that I've never wanted to write, I guess, that level of self-insert.
Mhm.
So I'm not just gonna write a novel about my latest game.
Yeah.
You know, I don't know. It's just never been my go-to. I can totally grok the people that do. Certainly, a ton of Shadowrun writers do. They've got a lot of self-insert characters and stuff. But um, yeah, I've just never done that. I still have characters that are largely mine, Agent Thorn and Kincaid and
Mhm.
stuff like that. Other people don't do a whole lot with them, but they're not like characters that I played for a long time
Yeah.
or whatever. I'm trying to even think now. I did one session with Agent Thorn once before making him a character, that because we needed a new spy for spy games. I had the chapter on like tradecraft, right, and espionage. So I was like, I'm going to do this first person type of thing. I need a new spy for that. And I bounced the character off Jason. And I said, hey, what do we think about this guy? He touches a couple of different bases than Fianchetto, and he can have a relationship with Fianchetto. So like, I guess he's technically kind of a self-insert. And then I've got a very like tertiary character that's been mentioned as a minor character in a couple pieces of fiction and as a contact on some characters in like the beginner box from SR5. A guy named Billy Shen was my first ever 4th edition Shadowrunner, but again, I played him once. I just like that character. So yeah, like there's a very few times that I've snuck in technically my character, but it's never been like a huge thing. I'm not writing from their perspective. The stories aren't about them. They're background characters in this other thing. So yeah, I don't know why I haven't. I just haven't.
Oh, yeah, that's actually interesting. I thought there would be a lot more about that with that. Could you talk about your work with EarthDawn, which is one of my favorite games I've never been able to play, and and how you do you? Let me figure out how to articulate this question.
No problem.
And have you done any or plan on doing any kind of connection with Shadowrun like it did back in the FASA days? I'm not sure if that's still a thing with Catalyst.
It's a complicated situation because legally the rights to EarthDawn belong to a different company than legally the rights to Shadowrun, right?
Oh, I did not know that.
So yeah, I mean they're owned by different people. When FASA fell apart, both of these games scattered to different companies. EarthDawn went through a couple different ones. I want to say it was Red Brick and Living Room games. I'm worried now that I'm getting the company names wrong. And then it went back to now a company called FASA that is not old FASA, but is formed by one of their founders. Okay. So it's got, some FASA street cred or, whatever you want to call it. But yeah, so, Catalyst Game Labs licenses the rights to Shadowrun from Topps. And then you've got FASA that has the rights to EarthDawn, and those aren't the same company. So we're not going to, do any major crossovers. There's not going to be a crossover adventures or anything like that. But in Shadowrun, the ties are still there, right? We haven't retconned any of it away. The immortal elves aren't gone. The great dragons aren't gone. The idea of the raising mana level and the language Sparethiel and the language Orzet for Orcish, right? All that stuff is still there. So it's in a weird spot because we do know the canonical future to EarthDawn is their game 1879.
I'm not familiar with that one at all.
Yeah, a lot of people aren't, but it's their own what if mana came back thing, right? So they've got this game 1879 that is the official canonical future to EarthDawn.
Oh, I'll have to look that up.
But EarthDawn is still the official canonical past to Shadowrun. So I think of it as a multiverse type of thing, right? Yeah. Like it just branched out and now there's kind of 2 EarthDawns going, and one of them can totally still be the backstory to Shadowrun. So it's in an interesting place because legally we can't do a ton with it, and we can't do huge things with it in EarthDawn, expecting them to affect Shadowrun necessarily, like Backseat Fortsea. But I know both line devs. I like both line devs. Both line devs like me. And I expressly got them to talk about this because I was like, all right, listen, you guys, here's what I want to do.
Didn't end up in a knife fight or anything, did it?
No, everything's cool. So yeah, like we have kind of a gentleman's agreement between the companies that we can still do some Easter eggs and stuff. So, and I actually wrote one a couple years ago in is it Night Terrors? It was a magic book for Shadowrun that's got just a bunch of like evil stuff in it, right? And one of the stories, or one of the setting things in there, plot hooks, is an archaeological dig where they found some artifacts. And once my EarthDawn novels are out, the artifacts that they found in that Shadowrun archaeological dig are going to look really familiar to a lot of people.
Oh, I'm gonna have to.
Right.
You
So
got me
it's
excited about that.
yeah. So it's, again, it's not like a huge, the meta plot thing, right?
Mhm.
But yeah, so we can still do Easter eggs. We can still do little winks and nods to it, and stuff like that. Uh, we can still build on the existing connection. We're just not adding new
New-
major
yeah.
ones, right?
So the horrors are
Um,
still connected to each other. Then,
yeah. But yeah, so and there's some people that are really in like invested in a misunderstanding of that status. There are some people that will argue tooth and nail that the two games are completely separate. There are no ties. They've been retconned away. A couple months ago, I got in a fucking knockdown drag out fight on Facebook with somebody that just would not let it go.
wow.
And I was like, listen, please understand, I write for both. Like, I'll tag the line developers in this post. Like, I think they need to be members to post, but like whatever, like please listen to me. Like, please listen to me. And they just like would not let it go. They were just certain that everything had been retconned. The two games were completely separate. They also had like the wrong timeline of corporate ownership, and but like they just had this dogged certainty. And a bunch of people were liking their posts. So there's clearly a sizable chunk of the fan base that has a different idea of the situation. So hopefully this will help a
Well,
little to
that's one of the
clarify.
fun things about an
But yeah.
RPG. If you don't like it, don't put it in your game. It's easy as that.
Yeah, and it wasn't even necessarily that the person didn't like it. It's just that they were certain that this was the situation.
Mhm.
So it was kind of weird, but and the situation has changed over the years, but that's where it's at now. As there's
Oh, yeah.
there's multiple of us that are freelancing for both companies, and we have talked to our bosses at both companies to find out how much we can do, and we're doing that much. Right? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
We know where the line is, and we're doing it, and just kind of having some fun.
That's
The
it sounds like a
EarthDawn,
lot of fun for a writer being able to do that.
yeah. The EarthDawn novels, unfortunately, aren't going to come out till all three of them are done.
Mhm.
We're doing a trilogy. They want the whole shebang. So yeah, that's why I can't name drop them just yet, but we're definitely working on it. And I'm making pretty good progress. And yeah,
I
we're
will
hoping.
definitely be looking forward to that. As I've always had a soft spot for EarthDawn, but I've never had the chance to actually play it. I've just read the books.
Check out the podcast then. Check out Legend of EarthDawn. We'll put a link in then.
Oh yeah.
Because we handle the mechanics pretty often, especially in the earliest sessions, where you're kind of talking through. All right, so I do my deck step plus my melee weapon step,
Mhm.
right? Like we're kind of trying to explain as we go. And anytime we run into a rules question, it's pretty great because we're like, hey, Josh, right? Because we got the line
Oh, you
developer
got the guy right there.
Yeah. So anytime we run into something weird, it's kind of neat because then Josh can make a note of it to like make sure that it's in
A little bit more
errata or
clear.
something,
Yeah.
right? And then, but we've got him right there to make the snap call.
That's handy.
Yeah, it's pretty great.
Have you ever got him to like not know or actually misdo the rules by accident?
I don't think
Because
so.
that would happen with me if I was the developer.
Right. You'd just be like, I don't know, make it up. No, Josh is on it, man.
Oh, nice.
He knows his stuff. He also does an EarthDawn. God, is it EarthDawn Survivor Guide? I want to say. Now I gotta find it because if I'm gonna name drop Josh, I want to name drop him
Do it
hard.
right.
Yeah, EarthDawn Survival Guide. I'll put a link in there too.
Please
I
do.
I don't work on this one, but Josh does. So if I'm going to talk about him, I'm gonna name drop a link
Oh
here.
yeah.
But he does a podcast about EarthDawn. And he's good dude, smart dude, knows his stuff, dude.
Okay.
And yeah, they've got a really cool thing going with that podcast.
So I think we only got about 30 minutes left. So I want to go to
Sure.
the next question. And what recent things are you working on or upcoming projects? It doesn't have to be Shadowrun, but any other games or anything you're developing right now that you want to talk about?
I'm going to start with a Shadowrun one,
Mhm.
just to touch base there, because I know that's why most people are here. And I'm glad you have a shirt on. So
Oh
I'm
yeah.
hoping it's the Shadowrun connection is
I've
why,
had this one.
you're
I've
dressed
had this one
today.
forever.
Yeah,
I think I even have a
yeah.
little stain
Oh
on it
yeah,
when I was looking at
yeah.
the.
It's the old logo for sure.
Oh yeah.
But I will go Shadowrun starting. Um, there is some new Russell Zimmerman fiction on the very, very close horizon.
Mhm.
So I do want to pimp that. And I just got to see the first draft of the cover art
Uh,
very recently, like just
if you're
last week.
able to share it, I will. I will edit in a
Uh,
little snippet.
I am not.
Okay.
So yeah, and I don't even want to name drop the title, but I
No.
just want to let people know it is almost through the whole damn pipeline. Like cover art's getting done. We're hoping, knock on press board wood. Here, I'm knocking my guitar. That's the closest real wood I've got is my telly. Um, but we're hoping it's going to be hitting in June or July.
Okay.
So real
That's real
heckin'
soon.
soon, there is a pretty cool Russell Zimmerman fiction thing coming out. So keep an eye out for that. I'll be sure to be singing it from the rooftops when it hits. I'm pretty psyched about it, and I
When
hope
it
the
does,
fans are
let
too.
me know, and I will edit in the link to into this
Sure,
video when it's up.
absolutely. Yeah, and you'll see it on the Shadowrunners Union and stuff too, I'm sure. So yeah, but you will definitely hear about it. So that's the biggest one on the Shadowrun front, I think. I do have a couple other things in the Shadowrun pipeline that are smaller. I've got some other pieces of enhanced fiction. Like I wrote Adversary, which is what I mentioned. It's a short fiction with some rules. So I've got a couple pieces of enhanced fiction that are floating out there waiting on artwork and stuff like that. Um, I don't know. Now I've forgotten the name of the series. The first one was called Ingentus Athletes. Shadowstock, that's it.
Mhm.
Shadowstock Ingentus Athletes was an ebook product that came out where we're kind of covering um, an expanded metatype
Mhm.
and then something else with a theme. So Scott wrote this one with it being troll metatype options
I like
and
trolls.
and athletes, right? So it's a mixture of, there's football players, there's urban brawlers, there's
Mhm.
whatever, and then there's the advanced rules for trolls that would normally have been in um, like a player's guide. It's your giants, Fomorians,
Mhm.
Cyclops, right? Those advanced metatypes. I have written one of those.
Mhm.
I don't think I'm allowed to say what it is though.
Oh,
So, but one of those, a shadow stock.
I'm all about the orcs and trolls. I love the trog life. You had me excited. I was hoping you're going to be able to elaborate on
No,
that.
I will give a small spoiler and say that it is not elves. So a lot of people are probably going to assume it would be elves. It's not. It's something else. And now that I think about it, the group theme, the kind of affiliation
Mhm.
theme, probably isn't one that people are expecting from me either. So
Huh.
um, yeah, I don't know how close that is to done. I know that it's been edited, but again, there's always holdups with layout and cover art, and then they pace the release
Mhm.
dates anyway. So no telling when these will be out. But I do have a lot of stuff in the pipeline. There's
Hey,
holy crap. Now that I think about it, I want to say I've got a half dozen things that I am done with that are in the pipeline for Shadowrun. So, um, but definitely keep an eye out for that big fiction one. It should be hitting
mhm.
real soon.
So what about
The
non-Shadowrun stuff that you're working on?
Yeah, I already mentioned the EarthDawn trilogy.
Mhm.
Again, I've got absolutely no ETA on that, just because
That's
it's
honestly what I'm most excited
up to
about.
me. Thanks, glad. I hope it
Earthdawn just
lives
doesn't
up
get
to
enough
the
love
hype.
out there in the community, I don't think.
Yeah, and it's a neat game. It's just got a really really cool
It's got a cool
its own
background, a cool
mechanic.
concept too. It's kind
Yeah,
of
well, because it's
discovering a new world.
well that, and it's in a way, it's kind of a D&D setting where the D&D shit makes sense in world,
Oh yeah.
right? Like it's explained in world why these dungeons are here is like
Mhm.
a core conceit.
That's one
And
thing that's always bugged
you
me
know,
about D&D. Like, where are these
yeah,
dungeons coming from?
yeah. I mean, a lot of settings do have their own stuff because there's
Mhm.
different D&D settings. But like, to me, I think it was the first time that it was a core theme of the game, and they kept that in mind throughout. So it's really neat. Plus, it's a cool system. Um, it's the core mechanic of it, the steps
Mhm.
is really neat. Sorry, I talked about the EarthDawn stuff.
Oh no, no, no!
Um,
I trust me.
yeah,
We could probably talk about EarthDawn and just have a whole new interview
we
going.
probably could. The other most recent thing I've got that came out was Gangs of the Undercity, which is a skirmish scale miniature war game
Ooh.
set in a cyberpunk setting
Mm. Oh
where
wow.
magic also exists. So you've got hackers and spellcasters and elves and orcs and cyborgs and all that stuff.
So
Um,
it's basically a Shadowrun version of a tabletop war game
it's definitely Shadowrun
esque.
adjacent. You will find familiar names if you are a follower of Shadowrun products and you care about who your freelancers are at all. You will spot several of us in the credits for this, and of course the grand poobah of Frag and Unicorns games is your friend and mine, Opti.
Oh
Everybody
wow.
loves Opti. So yeah, it's a whole new setting. It's a whole new shtick for a setting. We are running with inclusivity as a core conceit of the setting and
Mhm.
of the writer pool in as much as possible. An awful lot of the people working on this game and on the RPG tie-in and on the fiction
Mhm.
anthology recently came out, um, are LGBTQ, are ethnic, minorities, are
Yeah.
women. Like it's hard sometimes in gaming to get a big group of people that aren't just like straight white dudes, right? Like
Yeah.
there's a lot. Um, but we've been going out our way to do that. So it's pretty cool. Um,
And could you tell
and
us
and
about like the skill of the game? Like, are you gonna have a squad or just a few guys or?
it's a skirmish scale,
Mhm.
and you have points to spend, so you can spend points on super pimping out a smaller number of characters.
Mhm.
But there's a lot of gang customization and a lot of character customization going on in it. So it's largely up to you. Um, Kind of think of every character as like a unit leader or or that sort of thing in like a Warhammer, right? Where
Mhm.
you can give them magic items
Oh yeah.
and customize them. It's kind of that level of customization. A lot
So
of
it'd be kind of
characters.
similar to like Necromunda or Mordheim.
Yeah, yeah, definitely some inspiration from the same genre,
Mhm.
as that skirmish scale. So it's pretty cool. We've got the link I just tossed you to put in here is actually to a free version of the rules.
Oh wow.
It's
I
a
will definitely link that.
100% free download, and if you think it looks cool, the not free version is only $10 on drive-through, and the
That's
full
not
version
bad.
of the book is gorgeous. It's got really cool artwork. It's got a ton of lore. I was the lead fiction writer on that source book,
Mhm.
so a lot of the like character write-ups and stuff, that's all me.
Oh wow.
So yeah, and I wrote for the anthology that also came out, and I'm also currently working on a novel for them, featuring the gang that I'm kind of the most invested in here, the gang that
Mhm.
I made up for the anthology, and a gang that I made up for the rule book. And they are an all rocker gang.
Like
They're just a rock band. They
oh
are a
well,
rock
I
band
thought you were talking
that
like rocker, like the old British subculture, like Motorhead
no,
kind of style.
they are literally a rock band that just is made of survivors of a fantasy cyberpunk dystopia setting. So
That's
they're all kind of
freaking cool.
badass, and they've all got their own entanglements with the various factions. Um, the leader of the elf gang
Mhm.
is the aunt to one of the characters. The leader of they're not really a racial gang at all. It's the kind of everybody else gang, the Flaming Skulls. But their leader guy is the sister, or sorry, his sister is in the band, and so
So
they've
they're
all
really
got,
connected to like everybody.
yeah, but they're also kind of on the outs with everybody
They
because
may
they've
know
all,
everybody, but they may not
yeah,
like them.
because they've all screwed up, right?
Oh,
It's just this lovable band of misfits that
sounds like my
are,
scooter club.
yeah, that are all mostly pan and poly. They have one roadie that's a centaur. She's big enough she can carry everything for everybody. So they have a roadie, and she's actually Ace, which was fun to toss in the middle of the stories about your awesome 80s rocker lifestyle fantasy
Yeah.
with drinking and drugs and boinking groupies and all that stuff. The one that can drink them all under the table is just not interested in sex. So like that was kind of fun to toss in. But yeah, they're a neat little band of misfits, rogues, and troublemakers. Um, and I'm writing a whole ass novel for them. So I'm really psyched about that one. It's been a lot of fun to work on that, and yeah, so I'm looking forward to more stuff for Fragging Unicorns. And I still think of it as the Gangs of the Undercity universe,
Mhm.
because the skirmish scale game is what came out first, but there is an RPG in the works, all kinds of stuff.
It
So
sounds really
uh,
interesting. I'm looking forward to it.
it's
So,
cool stuff. The minis are great too. Um, Opti has knocked it out of the ballpark with
yeah,
the
are you able to
sculptures
share any of
stuff.
the miniature pictures?
You should be able to spot them on there. I'm going to be honest. I'm trash with Zoom. This is
Oh
actually
no,
my
no, no.
first Zoom
What
call,
what
but
I'll do is
yeah,
after I'm done recording this, I'll snip into. I'll just video edit in some pictures from the if that's okay.
sure,
Yeah,
yeah,
check them
can
out.
we definitely find some. So yeah, that's pretty cool, and I'm real excited about that one. Um, yeah, so lots of Shadowrun stuff in the works. Some Gangs of the Undercity stuff in the works. The EarthDawn trilogy in the works.
Mhm.
um, just yeah, as always, a pretty full plate, and then I'm working on some of my own stuff in the background that just keeps on getting pushed in the background because I've always got this other cool
That's
stuff going on.
always the way it
But
happens.
I've got my own sci-fi setting where I'm working on a series of novels, and I've got my own RPG set in the Old West,
Oh,
uh,
I think there
with
should
its
be
own.
more Old West RPGs out
Yeah,
there.
so I don't talk about it tone because it's still definitely in the
Okay, I
works.
was gonna say if you want
Um,
to elaborate on that, but it sounds like you're
we're
kind
gonna
of
hold
saving it.
off. Yeah, before I can dive back in on it very much, I need to clear my plate of some other stuff.
Yeah.
So I don't want to get everybody too up. But yeah, there will eventually be a Kickstarter, and I'll be yelling about it everywhere.
Okay.
But I've got so much else I'm working on that I don't even want to give an estimate. So, but yeah, so psyched about the Shadowrun stuff, of course. Psyched about EarthDawn, psyched about Gangs of the Undercity. Um, I don't have a lot of other irons in the fire right now. 2020 threw a lot of monkey wrenches
Oh yeah.
into the industry.
Yeah,
Um,
I
and
think I
yeah,
went with everybody. I should have been retired in Puerto Rico right now, but I'm still in Portland.
yeah.
The
Um, so yeah, it just a lot of stuff got kind of put on hold for a while. So, but yeah, my kind of old reliables, I'm definitely still doing immediate work for. So
okay,
yeah,
well, on this last 15 minutes, you mind answering a few fan submission questions?
absolutely. What do we got?
Um,
I saw your posts. Some of them were
Colorful,
yeah,
to say the
yeah,
least.
it happens.
The
So what do we got?
so the first one is from John Sellers. He asked, How do you drink your whiskey?"
I don't anymore. I used to drink it absolutely neat, by which I mean uh, bachelor living alone from the bottle. Like I was just like, yeah,
Oh,
whatever. Yeah, but I don't drink very often anymore. I drank a little too much for a while, and
as
I
all
don't
things, you got to
anymore.
learn your limits.
And yeah, and so And then most of the time that I go places where we would be drinking, hanging out with buddies at cons is about it. I try to be really moderate with it so that some of my friends don't have to be. If you go to a con with your friends that are, moms and dads,
Mhm.
and this is it, this is all they get all year to just actually get fucking hammered, right?
Yeah.
I'm like, all right, it's you go ahead. Like I'll have one, I'll toast everybody, and then I'll make sure you don't die, right? Like
That's being a
so
good
it turns
friend.
into I don't drink a ton anymore, but
Oh,
I was a Bushmills guy real hardcore for a while.
oh, nice.
But I always drank it
So,
neat.
and
Never
the,
liked never liked anything else.
yeah, so the most asked question by pretty much every fan of yours is Bodhi going to make an appearance in this video?
We will see if I can lure her out here. Give me 1 second. I'm gonna
Okay.
be super adorable and dorky for a sec. Go there. Unfortunately, Bodhi turned 16 this year, so she is deaf as hell.
Oh.
I know that she is right around the corner from me in the hallway. So give me 1 second.
Oh, okay. Yeah, no problem.
All right, I've lured her in. Let me
Awesome.
do the camera swap that I learned earlier. Jump over to this camera. And, oh, come on, allow.
Buffering.
Here
It's
we
a
go. All
dog.
right. So you get Bodhi. You get Bodhi fresh from a nap. So she's got
Hey.
that blep. All right, she fixed it. But she's a very good girl. And she will sit.
Oh, wow.
Sit, good girl.
Such a cute dog.
So there we go.
Yay.
For more Bodhi bear action, says she holds her dentist stick like a little lady. She's a dignified old lady.
Oh.
So I do have Bodhi on almost every Twitch stream I do on Monday, Wednesday, Fridays. I start almost every stream just like this, letting everybody look at Bodhi instead of me and letting her do her daily toothbrushing. So there you go. Just saying, look for that Twitch link and
send me the link so I can put it in the description, please.
Yep, absolutely. So look for the Twitch link at the bottom and you'll see more Bodhi. She is my beloved baby girl. So yeah, she's daddy's favorite, and mom understands that. I've explained to Felicia many times. She's number 2, like poop, after Bodhi.
Okay.
I've had Bodhi sit in the front and Felicia sit in the back seat before.
Oh wow.
Not even joking. So she is my spoiled ass baby girl.
It sounds like me and my cat.
Yep.
I often say if reincarnation is real, I'm going to come back as one of my own cats.
Yeah.
The next one is from I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this right. Envirmos. He asks, if you're the God Emperor of Catalyst for a day, what would be your first decree?
That's a really, really tough one. Partially because the answer is like what could happen in a day, right? like how much can you
how much can you do in one day?
Right, yeah, and how much of a change all right, she's wandering back out of our lives.
Bye, Bodhi.
She's going back. She likes to lay down in the hallway pretty often. Oh, she's wandered to the bedroom. We'll see what happens. Anyways, she likes to be at most a room away from us because she's old and deaf. So she likes to be close, but she really likes to watch the doorways so she can know if we're going somewhere. So a lot of times when Felicia and I are both home, she'll be in the hallway watching both doors. So anytime one of us gets up, she knows and she can follow us and maybe we'll feed her, right? So she's opportunistic like all doggos. Yeah. If I could decree things, and sorry, if I was God Emperor of what exactly?
Catalyst.
Okay, so Catalyst. See, that's tricky too because I'm not God Emperor of Tops, so I'm still just licensing.
I kind of think I think it would go to Tops. Like if you're the God Emperor of Tops and your omnipotent powers go for the entire any game system that you work on.
Entire Shadowrun property. Yeah. Okay. Then I would definitely schedule another Shadowrun RPG for PC gaming. That would be my biggest thing. I would want a either go for kind of an open world Grand Theft Auto style game
Mhm.
or epic Mass Effect style game, because you could play Mass Effect pretty easy in Shadowrun, just filing off some serial numbers, right?
Yeah.
It's already got tech and magic and stuff,
Mhm.
so either one of those kind of BioWare um, vibe games with Mass Effect, or straight up sandbox Grand Theft Auto style,
Mhm.
but some of the people on the street are metahumans, right? And a more character customization, at least at start and cosmetically. So let's say more of a Saints Row and
Mhm.
less of a Grand Theft Auto, um, especially the latter Saints Rows where they have RPG elements. I think a big ass, gorgeous, mainstream AAA video game would be an influx for a lot of new blood. It would be a delicious treat for existing fans. Um, and it could potentially be like an excuse for a new edition and a skirmish scale tie-in game, right? They're doing a skirmish scale game tie-in for Cyberpunk,
Oh wow,
Cyberpunk Red
I
right
didn't know
now.
that.
Yep. I've been playing some Cyberpunk Red and keeping an eye on their stuff. And me and their media guy are friendly. Our Telsorian follows me on Twitter, which still geeks me out. Um, I've gotten followers on Twitter and Facebook that still absolutely nerd boy me. Like I absolutely still geek out. But yeah, so like our Telsorian's doing tie-in skirmish scale stuff, and they had this Cyberpunk Red and Cyberpunk 2077.
Mhm.
Flawed as it is, it's still a really great
I've
game. I loved it.
I've always
Um,
loved Cyberpunk. I
yeah,
think I still have an original box set of it floating around in my collection
nice.
somewhere.
Yeah, to me, uh, Johnny Silverhand is right up there with Dodger, Ghost, and
Mhm.
Sally Sung
Oh yeah.
for just iconic characters that again that to me perfectly made sense to have fiction mixed into my RPG stuff.
Oh
So
yeah.
2077 had a lot of flaws, but it was still really great, and it still got a lot of eyes on Cyberpunk. So that would be my, if I can snap my fingers, cast wish, make a thing happen,
Mhm.
it would be a big ass, Shadowrun video game with a couple commercials and some Facebook ads, and stuff like that, and get a bunch of new blood in, which new editions do, which sixth edition has done, but get a bunch of new blood. But also, I know all the 30-year-old fans, by which I mean fans for 30 years, not just fans that
Yeah.
are 30.
I'm one of
But
them.
but those guys too, right? But like, I just think a video game gets a lot of eyes on a property, gets a lot of
Mhm.
tie-in,
That's how I've gotten
and yeah,
Shadowrun Returns is how I got a lot of new players for my
yeah,
Shadowrun campaign.
yeah.
Um,
Um,
so the
and
next
even
question.
those games were, you know, they're a different type of game, but we still, people still show up in the Shadowrunners Union,
Mhm.
which is a Facebook group I moderate,
I will
or
definitely link
stuff
it in
like
there.
that. People still show up in those that are, hey, I played the PC game and now I want to try the RPG. Because every now and then those games still go on sale on Steam or whatever. You get all three for $10, stuff like that, and
And
like
and
it
one of the
works.
greatest
Like
thing
it's
was
still,
the
yeah,
campaign editor in there, so you can always
yeah,
there's always new games. So it's continue. You have the main campaign, but you're always can download more because people are making them.
yeah. So it's just, yeah. I think a video game would be like the best thing for Shadowrun. Just get that big spike in popularity
Mhm.
and that excuse for more other stuff. Like I said,
Yeah. It's working big
make,
for BattleTech right now too.
yeah, BattleTech's been killing it. Those PC games are great.
Yeah, they're just getting more
Harebrained,
people the tabletop. Yeah.
yeah, harebrained.
The next one comes from Robert Hoffman. What's your proudest moment as a writer or a GM?
Uh, and this one I don't know. I almost kind of touched on already with Neat, like because I feel like Neat was such a transformative thing, but instead I'm going to smush them together and just go as a geek as a whole, right? Like my writer plus GM. And the proudest moment I get is still, like I said, geeking out when these guys that I geek out at
Mhm.
talk to me and know me and like me and treat me like a peer. Like I absolutely still get all heart aflutter when Michael Stackpole knows my name
Wow.
and says, "Oh, hey, Rusty," when we run into each other at Gen
That's a
Con,
legend there too.
right? And Jordan Weissman, same thing. I got an email from Jordan Weissman once asking me about Shadowrun lore,
Oh
right?
wow.
Like, right?
Yeah.
like,
Wow.
like so when the
That's
original,
how you know you made it, when he's hitting you
yeah.
up. Or,
So, and actually, it was for Shadowrun Returns.
oh wow.
The Telestrian storyline there. He
Mhm.
was asking me about some tier family tree stuff,
Oh
and
wow.
I'm just like, I want to print this and frame it as like holy shit, like I know more about part of Shadowrun than Jordan Wiseman does,
Yeah.
and but and we've talked a bunch of cons where we've gotten friendly. I wrote on the Shadowrun Returns anthology,
Mhm.
and I was a little bit of a consultant with some other stuff, and
Um,
like,
such great,
but
such great game. If anybody out
yeah,
there hasn't played it, go play it immediately.
yeah. I would suggest actually playing Dragonfall or Hong Kong first, because Returns is, I think, the weakest of the three games.
Mhm.
I'll waste 30 seconds on that. It was the first, and it was the most concerned with the game engine
Yeah.
instead of gameplay, if that distinction makes
Yeah.
sense, and story and plot. So I would play Hong Kong or
Uh,
Dragonfall instead.
Dragonfall was
Yeah,
fantastic. That was my favorite.
nice,
I
nice.
have not actually played Hong Kong yet. I actually
Yeah,
have it on my computer. It's been
you
sitting there for
should.
probably 4 years.
Yeah.
I think.
Those out. But yeah, like, and even just this week, Tom Dowd, another one of the primogeniture, right? One of the freaking Shadowrun firstborn that shaped and formed this universe, started a post on Facebook with, "You guys can't see it, but I'm wearing a shirt right now that says I agree with Rusty 100%." And like I just want to man, I should get those shirts made. Tom Dowd agrees with me 100%. Like just uh because it's still a thing, man. Like I still geek out at that, because these are the guys that wrote the things that shaped me as a geek.
Mhm.
And being a geek has so shaped me as a person. It's my job, and like I said, it's how I met my wife. um, I was playing uh, uh, an exile from the tier that wanted to start sleeping someplace with wards, so he seduced the combat mage in our group so that he'd start crashing at her place because he knew it was warded, and that's how me and my wife started hanging out. Was was I seduced her character, so we started to role play
Oh
more,
wow.
so we became better friends, and like that was like so. Being a geek is how I've met so many of my very best friends, and it's the pillars of my annual life. I center parts of my year around the conventions that I go to, and it's so much of who I am now. So anybody that was formative to me in that way, right, that helped to make these games happen in the first place,
Mhm.
or like Michael Stackpole, who's written 8
Oh
million
man, yeah.
novels, right? Any of them knowing me, and me working on stuff with them. I'm in an anthology with these guys, and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's just I still absolutely just geek out, like total nerd. And and there's people that are like that with me, and I just want to be like, no, stop. Like, I'm not one of these guys, right? And that's
uh,
part of why I try to
as
be as
far as I'm
accessible.
concerned, you're up there with them, man. And
Yeah.
you,
And people say that, and I grin like this every time.
there's
So
a reason I hit you up about doing an
yeah,
interview, man.
and that's part of why I try to be as accessible as I am. That's why I'm active on social media,
And I
and
appreciate
that's
that.
why I don't have a separate account where I talk about nerd
Mhm.
stuff or whatever on Facebook, on Twitter, on whatever. Is because I just think, like, how cool would it have been if when Shadowrun first came out, we were this connected and social media was this much of a thing, and we could talk to, and for me it's going to be Nigel Finley every time.
Mhm.
um, I joke, and actually this is going to be in the acknowledgments page on my next novel, because that's what's written there, is I call Nigel Finley my mentor spirit. because he wrote so many of the first edition Shadowrun things that were absolutely formative to me,
Mhm.
and ranging from elf bullshit to detective bullshit, right? Like,
Mhm.
so much of his stuff has shaped who I am as a geek and as a Shadowrun fan.
Is there anything
Um,
in
yeah,
particular more than another that he's worked on that's influenced you?
literally just all of it. But
Just all of it.
he wrote a series of Shadowrun novels about a PI that's in over his head.
Mhm.
He wrote the first edition Tier Tanger source book.
One of my
He was
favorites.
such a contributor to so much geekery. And
Well,
he
if
passed
you get a
away
line
in
to him and he wants to do an interview, let me know.
no, he passed he passed away in 1995.
Did he?
Yeah, he
I
had a
did not
heart
know that.
attack at 35 years old.
Oh man, I didn't
And
realize
it just
that.
yeah, and it kills me because this guy wrote for everything from Dungeon Magazine to Dragon Magazine
Yeah.
to Forgotten Realms stuff. Um, and then
Uh,
of course Shadowrun, he wrote a
yeah,
ton.
you just wrecked my world.
Um,
Let me know that.
yeah,
Man.
yeah, and that's why I call him my mentor spirit, right? But yeah, and it's Harlequin's back. A lot of people's favorite adventure. That's he worked on that. He worked on some EarthDawn stuff.
Yeah, he's a
Um,
legend.
one of the denizens of EarthDawn books uh, was his. And I think um, what's the kind of the EarthDawn the one that was kind of like the player's guide,
I
the
think it was
Adept's
Player's
Way.
Hand. Ah, sorry.
Yeah, this
It's been
the one that's more details on Adepts. I want to
it's been
say.
probably over 20 years since
Uh,
I've read an Earthbound book, so bear
yeah,
with me a
but
little.
I mean, he just the guy worked on everything, and I just think, every now and then I'm like, man, like imagine if this fucking guy wrote
Wrote
for this
more.
other 25 years,
Yeah.
right? Like what a freaking titan of the industry. But especially with his Shadowrun stuff, just so much of it was absolutely formative to my mindset on Shadowrun as a setting.
Mm.
Um, but having Tom Dowd up there also
Yeah.
bantering with me and liking my posts and talking to me like a peer, and of course, like I said, Michael Stackpole, and just yeah, like it's just yeah, it still is really cool, and I just think like how great it would have been for me as a young geek, middle school, high
Mm.
school, being able to talk to those guys, um, and I try to be that available,
Yeah.
these days. So
That's
so
great that
yeah,
you are, and I think sure not just myself, but everybody appreciates that.
so
We're running out of time, so I got one
yep,
more question to ask you from
hit me with it. What
It's
do we got?
Just Jose. It's Just Jose asked, as the old saying goes, life imitates art. What about the various arts you write would you like to see come to life in the real world?
Oh man, not a ton because Shadowrun sucks. It's an awful world in a lot of ways, and we're getting close enough to it as is. I think that, like honestly, I think my number one thought would be a fucking data jack. Like
Oh
just
yeah.
having data jacks from like any cyberpunk setting, like that would be dope. Just direct neural interface with a computer. And this is coming from me, and I type real fast. I did data entry for 8 years as a job, and before I started writing full time, so like uh, my keyboard skills aren't what hold me back very often,
Mhm.
but still being able to write at the speed of thought,
Would be
right?
awesome.
Being able to hit up Wikipedia at the speed of thought,
Mhm.
being able to access my PDFs by just thinking real hard, like yeah, that'd be pretty dope. And as a geek, being able to
Oh yeah.
play
Just
video
imagine the
games
video. I was
that
gonna say
way.
the
Yeah.
video game aspect.
So yeah, I'd say some of the tech would be great. Some of the tech uh, improving the ability for diabetics
Mhm.
and stuff, right? Being able to fix some of that stuff with gene tweaking, getting rid of diabetes and sickle cell and you know, easier access to more affordable organ transplants,
Mhm.
and you know, so a lot of the tech level in Shadowrun would be cool. The problem would be making that stuff accessible,
Mhm.
uh, which not that stuff isn't accessible today, right? So
Yeah.
yeah, but you know, that sort of thing I think could help a lot of people. Magic coming back could help a lot of people. If you're feeling optimistic,
That's kind of
maybe
a
it would
roll of
shake
die.
up, yeah, like maybe it would shake up the world enough that we'd be a little less shitty.
Mhm.
Um, you know, and maybe it'd be cool to, you know, be an adept and just have this supernatural talent for something.
Yeah.
You know, I'm a sucker for YouTube videos that are compilations of people doing stuff good,
Mhm.
like whether it's, you know, flipping pancakes at lightning speed, or doing parkour, or you know, whatever.
Yeah,
Just
I wonder
you
if
know
there's
the
an
videos I'm
adept that's
talking about.
a chef adept. That would be
Yeah,
as a
probably.
chef myself, I would
Uh,
love to. I wonder how I could use
yeah,
magic to do some cooking.
yeah. So like, I just think, you know, actually having adepts would lead to some really cool video compilations. Like we got some cool ones without that stuff, but like, you know, magic coming back, and again, it could help with disease
Yeah.
and stuff like that. A lot of the spells. So yeah, I mean, like there's some of it that could be really good, but then I also just think of how close we've come in so many ways, uh, if not surpassed this purpose written dystopia, right?
I
That we've already gotten worse than.
I often wonder
Um,
if the world is using Shadowrun as a playbook.
yeah. For one of my novels several years ago, I was doing some research on anti-homeless architecture
Mhm.
and stuff. Because one of the characters was homeless for a chapter, and I wanted to write kind of her experience just trying to survive in Seattle. And I was like, I was finding stuff fucking worse than I had planned,
Oh wow.
right? Like it was just, yeah. Anytime you see armrests on a park bench,
Mhm.
uh, bust out an Allen wrench if you got one and take that shit down. The armrests aren't there to be armrests; it's to keep people from laying down and
I
sleeping.
never even thought of that.
Yeah,
Wow.
I mean, like just small shit like that. And yeah, and a lot of urban architecture is there to keep the homeless away, not to help them, but to push them somewhere else. Right? They
Wow.
can't sleep right here.
That's sad.
Um, and like, yeah, so like I lost a lot of faith in humanity when I went down that rabbit hole. And what I settled on was paid benches with spikes
What?
that you had. That's what I made.
Oh, oh. I thought you meant
This
that
was
was a
the
thing you
level.
came across. I was like,
Like
what?
this
Who
was,
would
well,
do
I mean,
that?
there are paid public restrooms, so like we're not far from it,
Yeah.
right? But yeah, what I came up with was park benches that you had to slot your cred stick, you know, or
Yeah.
wirelessly transfer money to sit down, and then that got you X amount of time, and then there was a big countdown, and they were like, "You need to get up now,"
Oh wow.
and then spikes come through the back. So I was like, that's how absurd I had to go
Wow.
in a city park, like to be worse than what we do in real life, you know.
Wow.
So yeah, like where I'm at with porting much of Shadowrun in comes from sorry, we got a really loud somebody
Oh,
outside.
I've had neighbors making noise during this
Okay.
too.
But yeah, like part of my fear from introducing fantasy elements to real life is that we'll get worse than Shadowrun. Like you know, we'll end up worse off because there might just be a new way to divide people,
Yeah.
or it might, you know, the rise in tech might just increase the disparity between the poor and the rich. You know, like it's just
That's one thing
yeah.
about the cyberpunk genre is it's really supposed to take the worst things of our society, make them worse to try to learn a lesson from. But
And
sadly, I think a
instead
lot of
it was a
as a
roadmap.
you're a historian,
Uh,
I think you've heard the phrase
yeah,
"learn history so you can watch people make the mistakes of the past." So, is
yeah.
there finishing up here? Is there anything you want to finish up on?
I don't know. Not that I can like think of off the top of my head. just feel free to come hang out with me on my Twitch. We're going to make sure that link's in
Oh
there
yeah.
every Monday, Wednesday, Friday. If you're bored in the afternoon, just hang out and play PC games for a couple of hours, answer questions from chat, talk about whatever. I swap up the game. I actually went through Shadowrun Hong Kong and Shadowrun Dragonfall. I played the BattleTech game,
Oh yeah.
played some Magic the Gathering Arena,
Ooh.
been playing some Overwatch. So it's not all geeky, RPG adjacent stuff. I play whatever catches my eye. So hang out. We do that several times a week. And also on that Twitch is an RPG that I run for A Song of Ice and Fire setting.
Oh.
We are up into the 50s on episodes, and we've been playing every other
Oh
week.
wow.
So we've been at it for a while. And we're pretty invested in it, and it's been pretty cool. We got a neat group of people that we're having some fun with. So we play that live on Twitch, which is interesting. It adds a little something to a session. The other games that I've played online have been just for fun, or have been recorded for a podcast that later gets cleaned up.
Mhm.
So running and then playing on Twitch has been really neat. It's just a little different knowing you've got an audience, and it's fun. So yeah, that stuff's a good time. That's kind of my default geekery. Is my Twitch channel right now.
So you guys heard it. I'll put a link in the description. Check it out.
Yeah, feel free to swing by and say hi. And my Twitch profile and my Facebook profile and all that stuff has links to my Twitter, my Patreon, and all that. So there's a bunch of different ways to reach out to me, bunch of different ways to find more stuff I've written. My Patreon is a nice, steady monthly source of income that also gets you access to hundreds of thousands of words of my short fiction and of my essays on like game design and game reviews and stuff. So lots of stuff on there. I'm just, I try to be as out there as I can be. And because my wife lets me do this shit full time, I'm pretty heckin' accessible. So yeah, there's lots of ways to get a hold of me. If if fans have any other questions that I didn't hit in this interview, either bug Matt to do a follow-up, or you can find me on social media.
I'm always down.
Ask me yourself. So yeah, thanks for having me.
All right,
It was a good time.
thank you very much for your time. And if you know any other Shadowrun people that want to do an interview, send them my way. And
Will do.
all right, everybody have a good day, and everybody out there have a good day too.
Thanks. You too. Bye, everybody. Thanks for watching.
I thought today I'd show you a little painting that is so simple that even if you've never painted, you can do this one.